You're so repulsive I can't even stand to look at you anymore. Charles's words still echoed in my head, even though he'd left the house 2 hours ago. I stood at the kitchen counter, coffee mug clutched in my hand, staring at the dark liquid inside without drinking. The steam had long since disappeared, leaving it as cold and bitter as my life had become. When had everything changed? When had I become invisible to my own husband? My phone buzzed against the marble countertop, the notification making my heart skip. Charles had tagged me in a photo. My fingers trembled as I opened the app, hope flickering stupidly in my chest that maybe, just maybe, he was trying to include me in his life again. But the image that loaded shattered that fragile hope into 1,000 pieces. It was from our engagement party last year. I remembered that night so clearly, the way the lights had sparkled, how my mother had cried tears of joy, the weight of the ring Charles had slipped onto my finger. In the original photo we'd been standing together, my hand in his, both of us smiling at the camera. But Charles had cropped me out completely. Only he remained in the frame, looking carefree and happy, with the caption, "Missing the good old days when life was simple." The comments section made my stomach turn. "Dude, you look so free here," someone wrote. Another said, "Single life really suits you, doesn't it?" I scrolled through dozens of similar messages, each one feeling like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. My own husband was telling the world he was single. Our marriage, our bond, was being erased as if it had never existed. The phone slipped from my shaking hands and clattered to the floor. The screen didn't crack, but something inside me did. I pressed my palm against my chest, trying to hold together the pieces of my breaking heart. How could he do this? How could he pretend I didn't exist? That's when I caught it. A scent that didn't belong in our home. Roses and vanilla. Sweet and intoxicating, everything mine wasn't. Another Omega had been here, was here. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I forced my legs to move, following that foreign scent toward the living room. He was beautiful. That was my first thought when I saw the stranger sitting on our couch. Long blonde hair that caught the afternoon light. Perfect features that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Skin that practically glowed. He was laughing at something Charles had said. Completely comfortable in my home, as if he belonged here more than I did. Oh, the Omega noticed me standing in the doorway. His blue eyes swept over me with barely concealed curiosity. "Who's this, Charles?" I watched my husband's face as he turned toward me. The disgust in his expression was so familiar now that it barely hurt anymore. Almost. "That's Robert," Charles said dismissively. "He takes care of the housework." Housework. I was being introduced as the help in my own home. The Omega, River, I heard Charles call him, looked me up and down with a small smile. "Your house is incredibly clean," he said to Charles, as if I wasn't standing right there. "You really know how to maintain things." "I appreciate order," Charles replied, still not looking at me. "Everything has its place." I stood frozen, hands clenched into fists at my sides, trying to breathe through the humiliation. Should I say something? Should I tell River that I was Charles's husband, that this was my home too? But what would that accomplish? Charles would probably just throw me out. In his eyes I was already nothing, an embarrassment he kept hidden away. "Robert," Charles's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. "We need coffee. 2 cups." Not a request, a command. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just turned and walked back to the kitchen. Each step felt heavier than the last. Behind me I could hear them resuming their conversation, their laughter light and easy, the sound of 2 people who actually enjoyed each other's company. My hands shook as I prepared the coffee, tears blurring my vision. They dripped into the cups as I worked, mixing with the hot liquid. Would they taste the salt of my pain? Would they even notice? Probably not. Nothing about me seemed to register with Charles anymore. When I brought the tray back to the living room, Charles and River had moved closer together on the couch. My husband's hand rested casually on River's shoulder, his fingers playing with a strand of that perfect blonde hair. I set the cups down on the coffee table, trying not to make eye contact with either of them. "Thanks, Robert," River said with what seemed like genuine politeness. But there was something else in his eyes. Triumph, maybe. The look of someone who knew they'd already won. Charles took a sip of his coffee without acknowledging me. "Make pasta for dinner," he said. "River enjoys Italian cuisine." "Of course." My voice came out barely above a whisper. I started to retreat back to the kitchen, but River's voice stopped me. You know, Charles talks about your cooking all the time. Says you're quite talented in the kitchen. The words should have felt like a compliment, but they stung instead. Charles praised my cooking to others but never to my face. He made sure everyone thought his life was perfect. Perfect home, perfect food, perfect to perfect. Everything except me. I was the one imperfection he couldn't publicly acknowledge. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the kitchen, preparing an elaborate pasta dish. Every ingredient had to be perfect, every measurement exact. Maybe if the food was good enough, Charles would smile at me. Maybe he'd remember why he married me in the first place. Maybe he'd see something in me worth keeping. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air as I worked, but I barely noticed. My mind kept replaying that scene in the living room. Charles's hand on River's shoulder, the easy intimacy between them, the way my husband looked at someone else with warmth I hadn't seen in months. I caught my reflection in the polished chrome of the refrigerator. Dark circles shadowed my eyes. My skin looked dull and lifeless. My features seemed wrong somehow. Too plain, too ordinary. Everything about me screamed mediocre. No wonder Charles had found someone else. No wonder he couldn't stand to look at me. The timer dinged, pulling me from my thoughts. The pasta was ready. I plated it carefully, making sure everything looked restaurant quality. As I carried the dishes to the dining room, I could hear Charles and River still talking in the living room, their voices low and intimate. "Dinner is ready," I announced quietly. They came to the table, sitting beside each other rather than at opposite ends like Charles and I used to. Throughout the meal, they talked and laughed while I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching. River complimented every bite. Charles agreed enthusiastically, his face animated in a way I rarely saw anymore. I was a ghost in my own home, present but unseen, alive but invisible. And the worst part was, I was starting to believe I deserved it. 3 in the morning, and sleep remained impossible. Charles lay beside me in bed, a rare occurrence these days. He'd only come to my room because River had other plans tonight. Otherwise, my husband would have been anywhere but here. The guest room had become his sanctuary 2 months ago after he'd moved all his belongings there, claiming he needed space. Space from me, he meant, though he hadn't said it directly. Earlier that evening, I'd served them dinner while they acted as if I didn't exist. River had been effusive with his praise for the pasta. "This is incredible, Robert. You could be a professional chef." Charles had nodded in agreement, but his eyes never left River's face. He looked at the other Omega like he was seeing the entire universe reflected back at him. After River left, I'd expected Charles to return to the guest room. Instead, he'd come to my bed without explanation. Now he slept peacefully while I stared at the ceiling, my mind refusing to quiet. My phone lit up silently on the nightstand. A text message at this hour? I reached for it carefully, not wanting to disturb Charles. "Hi Robert, this is River. Charles gave me your number. I'm coming for dinner again tomorrow. Could you make that pasta again? Charles mentioned you're really skilled at cooking." I read the message 3 times, each word sinking in like stones in water. Charles had given River my contact information, so the other Omega could message me directly, place orders with me like I was some kind of personal chef service. Not his husband, not his partner, just help. I didn't reply, couldn't reply. What would I even say? I turned the phone face down and returned to staring at the dark ceiling, my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Charles shifted in his sleep, rolling toward me. For one brief, painful moment, his arm draped across my waist the way it used to when we first got married. My heart clenched with desperate hope. Maybe some part of him still remembered. Maybe deep down, he still cared. "River," Charles murmured in his sleep, his voice soft and affectionate. "You feel so perfect." Then he pushed me away roughly, as if I'd somehow contaminated him even in unconsciousness. I bit down on my lip hard enough to taste blood, forcing myself to stay silent. Forcing myself not to cry. What was the point? Tears wouldn't change anything. They wouldn't make me beautiful. They wouldn't make Charles love me. I slipped out of bed before dawn, unable to lie there pretending anymore. In the bathroom, I confronted my reflection under the harsh fluorescent lights. Dark circles ringed my eyes like bruises. My cheeks had hollowed out from not eating properly. Dry, cracked lips. Dull hair. Everything about my face seemed wrong. Asymmetrical, unbalanced, ugly. You're worthless, I whispered to my reflection. Nobody could love someone who looks like this. Saying it out loud somehow made it easier. If I heard these things from myself first, maybe they wouldn't hurt as much when Charles inevitably said them. Preemptive pain management. I picked up my phone and opened a browser, typing in Omega Appearance Enhancement Clinics. The search results flooded my screen with promises of transformation. Get the face you've always wanted. Alpha approved results guaranteed. One clinic offered something called complete facial reconstruction, a procedure that promised to transform ordinary omegas into extraordinary ones. The price was astronomical, more money than I'd ever had access to. But maybe I could find a way. If I looked different, if I looked better, would Charles notice me again? Would he stop seeing me as an obligation and start seeing me as someone worth loving? I started filling out an appointment request form. Name, age, current concerns about appearance. But when I reached the section asking for the reason I wanted surgery, my fingers froze over the keyboard. What could I write? My husband finds me so hideous he's replaced me with someone prettier. The truth was too pathetic to admit, even to strangers. I closed the browser, but the images of transformed omegas lingered in my mind. Perfect faces, perfect smiles, perfect everything. Everything I wasn't. Downstairs, Charles was already awake and getting ready. He wore his most expensive suit, the one he saved for important occasions. His cologne, the one that used to make my heart race, filled the air. He was clearly preparing for something special. Someone special. You're leaving early, I said, hating how small my voice sounded. He didn't even glance my way as he adjusted his tie. Breakfast meeting. I'll be back late tonight. River is coming by this evening, so make sure you prepare something nice. I gathered what remained of my courage. Charles, can we talk about us? He paused at the door, his back still to me. Several seconds passed before he slowly turned around. Talk about what, exactly? Our marriage. Our relationship. Whatever this is between us. A cold laugh escaped him. Relationship? Robert, what makes you think there's anything between us worth discussing? My throat went dry. He walked toward me, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixing with the scent that was uniquely his. Once, that combination had made me feel safe. Now it just made me feel small. Let me be clear, Charles said, his voice low and sharp. I didn't marry you because I loved you. Our families arranged it. I went along with it because refusing would have caused problems. But love. I've never felt that for you. Not even at the beginning. But the bonding mark is just biology, he interrupted. A formality our families required. It doesn't mean I'm bound to you emotionally. It doesn't mean anything except that we went through a ceremony and I bit your neck. That's all. The words hit me like physical blows. So what am I to you? An inconvenience, he said simply. One I'm working on resolving. Now if you'll excuse me, I have somewhere to be. The door slammed behind him, the sound echoing through the empty house. I stood in the foyer long after he'd gone, trying to remember how to breathe. The day passed in a blur. I prepared another elaborate Italian meal for River's evening visit, my hands moving automatically through familiar motions. When River arrived, he was all bright smiles and compliments. Smells amazing, Robert. You really have a gift. I managed a weak smile in return. Thank you. Charles is lucky to have such reliable help around the house. River continued, settling into the dining room as if he owned it. Help. Service. That's all I was. An ugly Omega kept around to maintain the household while my husband built a life with someone else. When Charles came home, he went straight to River, greeting him with a warmth he'd never shown me. They sat together at the table, hands clasped, sharing private jokes and meaningful glances. I watched from the kitchen doorway, feeling like an intruder in my own home. After River left, Charles called me back. For a moment, I thought he might thank me for the meal. Instead, he said, River will be coming regularly now. Make sure the house stays presentable and learn his favorite dishes. I don't want any complaints. Understood, I whispered. He walked away without another word, leaving me alone in the kitchen with the dirty dishes and the crushing weight of my own inadequacy. The clinic's waiting room was so sterile and white it hurt to look at. I'd finally submitted the appointment form, lying in the reasons section, writing personal improvement instead of the truth that my husband found me too repulsive to love. Now I sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, filling out additional paperwork with trembling hands. Robert Jensen? A nurse called my name. I stood on unsteady legs and followed her down a hallway lined with before and after photos. All those transformed faces smiled out at me, promising hope I wasn't sure I deserved. She led me into a consultation room where a doctor waited, a middle-aged beta with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "So, Robert," he began, reviewing my forms. "You're interested in facial reconstruction. Can you tell me specifically what changes you're hoping to achieve?" I swallowed hard. Everything. My eyes, nose, lips, skin tone. All of it needs to be different. He set down his clipboard and studied my face carefully. "That's quite extensive. May I ask what's driving this decision?" "You're a young omega. There's nothing medically wrong with your features." "I'm losing my alpha," I blurted out before I could stop myself. "He can't stand to look at me. He found someone better. Someone beautiful. I thought if I could just fix myself, maybe he—" My voice broke. The doctor leaned forward, his expression genuinely concerned. "Robert, surgery can alter your appearance, but it won't fix a broken relationship. If your alpha is judging you purely on superficial traits, the problem isn't your face. It's his character." I shook my head. "You don't understand. Charles is successful, respected, handsome. Everyone admires him. If he finds me lacking, then I must be the problem. I need to be better. I need to be someone he can be proud of." The doctor sighed deeply. "I can perform these procedures if you truly want them, but I'm going to require you to speak with a therapist first. I think you need emotional support more than physical changes right now." I didn't argue. There was no point. He didn't understand that therapy couldn't fix ugly. No amount of talking would change the way Charles looked at me with disgust, or the way he touched River with tenderness he'd never shown me. The walk home felt longer than usual. My mind spun with possibilities and impossibilities in equal measure. What if I went through with the surgery and Charles still didn't want me? What if I changed everything and remained unlovable anyway? I arrived home to find the house dark. Strange, Charles's car was in the driveway. As I stepped inside, I heard sounds from the living room. Sounds that made my blood run cold. Breathing. Moaning. The unmistakable noises of intimacy. My feet carried me forward even as my brain screamed at me to run. Through the archway I could see them on the couch, Charles and River, wrapped around each other, completely oblivious to my presence. I should have left. Should have turned around and walked away. But I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to look away from the scene of my husband with another omega in our home. "God, you're incredible," Charles breathed against River's neck. "So different from Robert. He's always so stiff, so awkward. Being with him feels like a chore." River laughed, a sound full of satisfaction. "Then why keep him around? If I were you, I would have divorced him ages ago." "Family pressure," Charles explained, his hands roaming over River's body. "But I'm handling it. My lawyer is drafting the papers now. Should be ready to file in a few weeks. Then I'll be free of him permanently." Divorce papers. He was already planning to leave me. Officially, legally, permanently. I must have made a noise, a gasp or a sob, because they suddenly pulled apart. "Someone's here," River whispered. I ran up the stairs into my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My whole body shook as I collapsed against it, sliding down to the floor. The sounds of them hurrying to dress drifted up from below, followed by urgent whispers I couldn't quite make out. I sat there all night, my back against the door, tears streaming silently down my face. By morning my eyes were swollen and my throat ached from crying without making a sound. When I finally emerged, Charles was at the breakfast table, looking annoyed. He glanced up as I entered, his lip curling slightly. "You look terrible," he said flatly. "Couldn't you try to make yourself presentable?" I said nothing. What could I possibly say? That I'd caught him with River? That I'd heard him planning our divorce? What difference would it make? He already knew I knew. He just didn't care. River arrived shortly after, breezing in like he owned the place. "Morning, Robert." His voice was cheerful, but his eyes held a knowing gleam. "Hope you're ready for today. I'm bringing some friends over later." Charles said, "It's fine. Can you prepare one of your Italian spreads?" "How many people?" I managed to ask. 5 or 6. Nothing too crazy. Just a casual get-together. 5 or 6 strangers who would see me serving them in my own home. 5 or 6 people who would assume I was the help while my husband entertained his lover and their friends. That's fine, I said, because what choice did I have? River left to run errands with Charles and I was alone again. I walked through the empty house, this beautiful prison that held nothing but painful memories now. Every room reminded me of moments when I'd hoped things would get better, when I'd believed Charles might learn to love me. In the master bedroom, the one Charles no longer shared with me, I found evidence of River's presence everywhere. An expensive watch on the nightstand, designer clothes in the closet. It wasn't enough that Charles had replaced me in his heart. River was literally taking over my space, erasing any trace that I'd ever mattered. I pulled out my phone and looked at that clinic website again. The faces of transformed omegas smiled back at me, promising a new life, a better life. But would changing my face really change anything? Would it erase the months of cruelty, the public humiliation, the private betrayals? My reflection in the bedroom mirror showed me the truth. This wasn't about being ugly. Charles had decided I wasn't enough, and no amount of surgery would alter that fundamental rejection. He wanted me gone, and he was systematically destroying whatever remained of my self-worth to make sure I left without a fight. But maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to make it easy for him. Maybe I didn't have to disappear quietly like he expected. Maybe I deserved better than being erased. The thought scared me, but it also felt like the first real thing I'd felt in months. Somewhere under all this pain and self-hatred, there might still be a person worth fighting for. I just had to find the courage to believe it. 3 days after witnessing Charles and River together, I made my decision. I would get the surgery. If Charles found me so hideous that he couldn't bear to look at me, then I would transform myself into someone he couldn't look away from. Someone so stunning he'd regret every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every moment he'd chosen River over me. The problem was money. Charles gave me a monthly allowance, but it barely covered groceries and household supplies. The surgery would cost thousands, money I didn't have and couldn't ask for. That's when I remembered the gold necklace my mother had given me before the wedding. I found it in the back of my jewelry box, still in its original velvet case. My mother's words echoed in my memory as I held it. "This is for your happiness, sweetheart. When times get difficult, this will help you through." She'd worn it on her own wedding day and her mother before her. 3 generations of love wrapped in delicate gold links. Now I was going to sell it, not for my happiness, but for the slim chance that Charles might find me worthy of his attention. The jeweler offered me far less than its actual value, but I took it anyway. What choice did I have? As I left the shop, tucking the cash into my wallet, I heard someone call my name. "Robert?" I turned to find Blake standing there, concern etched across his features. We'd been close friends in college, but I'd lost touch with everyone after marrying Charles. Blake looked older now, more mature, but his eyes held the same warmth I remembered. "Are you all right? You look..." He trailed off, clearly struggling to find polite words for how terrible I appeared. "You've lost weight. A lot of weight." "I'm fine," I lied automatically, "just tired from work." Blake stepped closer, studying my face with growing worry. "We haven't spoken since your wedding. I've been concerned. How are things with Charles?" The question broke something inside me. Maybe it was the kindness in his voice, or the fact that I hadn't had a genuine conversation with anyone in months. But suddenly I couldn't hold it together anymore. My throat and I had to look away to keep from crying in the middle of the street. "Come on," Blake said gently, taking my arm. "Let's get coffee. We need to talk." 20 minutes later we sat across from each other in a quiet cafe. Blake ordered for both of us while I stared at the table, trying to organize my thoughts into something coherent. How could I explain the past 5 months? How could I put into words the systematic destruction of my self-worth? "Tell me what's happening," Blake said once our drinks arrived. "The truth, Robert." And I did. Everything spilled out: Charles's affair with River being introduced as household help, the divorce papers being prepared in secret, the constant comments about my appearance. I told him about the surgery I was planning, about selling my mother's necklace, about lying awake at night wondering what was wrong with me that made me so fundamentally unlovable. Blake's expression shifted from shock to anger as I spoke. His hands clenched around his coffee cup so tightly I thought it might shatter. "This is abuse?" he said when I finally fell silent. "You understand that, right? What Charles is doing to you is emotional abuse." "I love him," I whispered, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. "That doesn't make any of this acceptable." Blake reached across the table and took my hands in his. "Robert, listen to me. You are not ugly. You are not worthless. You are not the thul here. Charles is destroying you because something inside him is broken, not because there's anything wrong with you." I wanted to believe him, but when someone tells you every day that you're disgusting, when they flinch away from your touch, when they replace you with someone more beautiful, how are you supposed to believe anything else? Blake drove me home afterward, but not before making me promise to call him if I needed anything. "I mean it," he said seriously. "Day or night. You're not alone in this." I thanked him and headed inside, already dreading whatever fresh humiliation awaited me. Charles sat in the living room with his laptop, barely glancing up as I entered. "Where were you?" he asked absently. "Running errands," I said, hoping he'd leave it at that. "Robert, wait." His tone made me freeze. "The jeweler called. Said you sold your mother's necklace today. Want to explain why?" My heart dropped. Of course the jeweler knew Charles. Everyone in his social circle seemed connected somehow. I needed the money. For what? Charles closed his laptop and stood, walking toward me. For the first time in months, he looked genuinely concerned. "If you needed something, why didn't you ask me?" The irony of the question almost made me laugh. "I want to get surgery. To change my face." His expression went through several rapid transformations. Concern melting into confusion, then hardening into something close to disgust. "Surgery? To look different? To look better," I corrected quietly. "So maybe you could stand to be around me again." Silence filled the room like poison gas. Then Charles started laughing. Not a gentle chuckle but harsh, mocking laughter that made my skin crawl. "You actually think that would help?" He shook his head, still laughing. "Robert, your face isn't the issue. The problem is everything else. Your personality, your neediness, your constant insecurity. No surgeon can fix those things. You could have the most perfect face in the world, and you'd still be fundamentally unappealing." Each word landed like a physical blow. I stood there taking it because what else could I do? "But if I change—" "Stop." Charles held up a hand. "I can't listen to this pathetic nonsense anymore. You are who you are. Accept it, because I will never love you. Not now. Not if you get surgery. Not ever. You're just an obligation I'm stuck with until the divorce papers are finalized. That's all you've ever been." He walked away, leaving me standing in the foyer. I heard his bedroom door slam, the sound echoing through the empty house. That night, I lay awake considering my options. I could stay and endure more of this until Charles officially divorced me. I could go through with the surgery and pray it made some difference. Or I could do something I'd never seriously considered before. I could leave. The thought terrified me. Where would I go? How would I survive? I'd built my entire life around being Charles's husband. Without that role, who was I? But maybe that was exactly the point. Maybe I needed to find out who Robert was outside of this toxic marriage. Maybe the person I'd been before Charles convinced me I was worthless was still in here somewhere, buried under moors of cruelty and self-hatred. As dawn light began filtering through my window, I made my decision. I would leave, not because I'd stopped loving Charles. That would probably take years. But because I finally understood that staying would kill me. Maybe not physically, but in every way that mattered. I just had to find the courage to actually do it. Morning came, and with it, clarity. I couldn't stay here another day. The realization hit me as I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, seeing not just the physical deterioration but the complete absence of life. My eyes. I looked like a ghost already. Time to stop haunting this house and actually live. I packed quickly, taking only what I absolutely needed. A few changes of clothes, important documents, and the cash from selling my mother's necklace. Everything else could stay. They were just things, and things didn't matter anymore. Freedom mattered. Survival mattered. Charles was still asleep in the guest room. I could hear River's voice through the door, low and intimate, confirming my suspicion that he'd spent the night again. They'd probably celebrate when they discovered I was gone. One less inconvenience for Charles to manage. I left a note on the kitchen counter, keeping it brief. I'm leaving. When the divorce papers are ready, I'll sign them. Be happy. No accusations. No pleas for him to reconsider. No dramatic declarations. Just a simple goodbye to a marriage that had never really existed. Walking out the front door felt surreal. I kept expecting someone to stop me, to call me back, but the house remained silent. I'd lived there for 5 months, but it had never been home. Just a beautiful cage where I'd slowly forgotten how to fly. Blake answered his door looking half asleep, but he woke up fast when he saw me standing there with my bag. He didn't ask questions, just pulled me inside and wrapped me in a hug that made my carefully constructed composure crumble. You can stay as long as you need, he said firmly. No conditions, no timeline, just rest. The first day passed in a blur. I slept most of it, exhaustion finally catching up with me now that I wasn't lying awake dreading the next morning. When I woke up, Blake had prepared a simple meal. Nothing fancy, just scrambled eggs and toast. But it was the first food that had tasted like anything in weeks. Then my phone started ringing. Charles's name flashed on the screen. I ignored it, it rang again. And again. Then the messages started flooding in. Where are you? Come home immediately. This is ridiculous. You realize I need you here? Who's going to handle the house? Not I'm worried about you or are you safe? Just concern about his domestic arrangements. Even now, even after everything, it shouldn't have hurt. But it did. I silenced my phone and tried to eat, but my appetite had vanished again. Blake watched me with concern, but didn't push. The doorbell rang an hour later. Blake answered it while I hid in the kitchen, already knowing who it would be. Where is he? Charles's voice carried through the apartment, sharp with anger. He's not here, Blake said calmly. Don't lie to me. I saw you two together yesterday. I know he came to you. Charles tried to push past, but Blake blocked the doorway. Even if he were here, you have no right to demand anything. Let Robert move on with his life. He's my husband, Charles shouted, and I could hear genuine fury in his voice. Mine. I decide what happens to him. I listened from my hiding spot, part of me stupidly hoping this anger meant Charles actually cared, that he'd realized what he was losing and wanted to fight for our marriage. Then Blake said what I couldn't. You don't need Robert because you love him. You need him because he runs your household while you play around with River. You want a maid, not a partner. The silence that followed felt heavy with truth. Stay out of our business, Charles finally said, his voice dangerously quiet. It stops being just your business when you drive someone to abandon their own home, Blake replied. That's when it becomes a matter of basic human decency. I heard footsteps retreating, then Charles's voice, louder now, clearly meant for me to hear. Fine. You have 1 week, Robert, 1 week to come back, or I'm filing those papers, and if you try to fight me in court, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you are. Pathetic, clingy, and so desperate for attention you destroyed our marriage with your insecurities. The door slammed. Blake found me in the kitchen, tears streaming silently down my face. Thank you, I managed to whisper. He pulled me into another hug. You deserve someone who actually values you. Charles never did. That night I made promises to myself. I would rebuild my life. I would remember who I was before Charles convinced me I was nothing. I would learn to stand on my own, without an alpha to define my worth. But late that night, lying in Blake's guest room, a small part of me still hoped Charles would call, not to threaten or demand, but to actually apologize, to say he'd made a mistake, to fight for us the way he should have from the beginning. My phone stayed silent, and maybe that was the answer I needed. Charles had shown me who he was repeatedly, someone who saw me as useful rather than valuable, convenient rather than cherished. I'd just been too desperate for his love to accept it. The next morning I woke up to Blake making breakfast and humming cheerfully. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the small apartment in a way our big house never had. For the first time in months, I felt something other than dread. It wasn't happiness yet. Not even close. But it was hope, fragile and uncertain, but real. What do you want to do today? Blake asked, setting a plate in front of me. I thought about it. What did I want? Not what Charles wanted or what my family expected or what society said an Omega should want. What did Robert, just Robert, actually want? I want to look for a job, I said slowly. Something small, just to start. I need to support myself, Blake smiled. That's a great first step. We'll update your resume after breakfast. It was such a simple thing. Breakfast with a friend. Making plans for the future. But after months of feeling invisible, being seen felt revolutionary. Charles didn't call again that day. Or the next. His silence spoke louder than his threats ever could. He didn't want me back. He just wanted his convenient arrangement restored. And for the first time, I realized I didn't want that either. I wanted more than being someone's afterthought. I deserved more. I just had to believe it long enough to make it true. A month passed. Then another. Life at Blake's fell into a comfortable rhythm that felt nothing like my marriage. I found work at a small cafe near his apartments. Nothing glamorous, just taking orders and making coffee. But it was mine. Money I earned, independence I built. A life I was choosing rather than enduring. Blake never made me feel like a burden. He helped me practice my customer service voice when I was too nervous to talk to people. He celebrated with me when I got my first paycheck. He listened when the memories got too heavy and I needed to talk about Charles without judgment. "You're getting stronger every day," he told me one evening as we shared dinner. "I can see it." I wasn't sure I felt stronger. The nightmares still came, dreams where Charles told me he'd made a terrible mistake and wanted me back. Only to wake up alone in Blake's guest room. But maybe strength wasn't about not hurting. Maybe it was about surviving the hurt and continuing anyway. The cafe job introduced me to a whole world I'd been sheltered from. Regular customers who learned my name. Co-workers who included me in their conversations. Simple human connection that didn't depend on my appearance or my usefulness. It was during an afternoon shift that River walked in. I saw him before he saw me and my first instinct was to hide in the back room. But something stopped me. Maybe pride. Maybe curiosity. Maybe just exhaustion with running. I stayed at the counter, watching him settle at a corner table with his phone. When he finally looked up and recognized me, his expression cycled through shock, confusion, and something that might have been guilt. "Robert?" He approached the counter slowly, as if I might bolt. "You work here?" "I do." I kept my voice professional, detached. "What can I get you?" "I just a black coffee." He paused, studying my face. "You left Charles." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "I did." River sat down at the counter, even though I hadn't invited him to stay. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I prepared his coffee, hyper-aware of his eyes following my movements. "I owe you an explanation," he finally said. "Or an apology. Probably both." "You don't owe me anything." I set his coffee down, avoiding eye contact. "Yes, I do." His voice cracked slightly. "When I met you, I thought you were weak. Letting Charles treat you that way, never standing up for yourself. I thought I was better, stronger, but now..." He laughed bitterly. "Now I understand why you seemed so defeated." I looked at him properly for the first time. He did look different, tired. Like he hadn't been sleeping well. The confident glow from before had dimmed considerably. "Charles found someone new." River continued without prompting. "Some Omega he met at a business conference. Young, ambitious. Exactly his type apparently. He's already introducing him around like I never existed." The revelation should have given me satisfaction. Instead, I just felt tired. "What will you do?" "Leave, I think. Like you did." He met my eyes. "I judged you for not being strong enough to keep Charles interested. But the truth is, nobody could. He doesn't want a partner. He wants an audience that changes whenever he gets bored with the performance." "Then why did you stay as long as you did?" River smiled sadly. "Same reason you did. Probably. Kept hoping he'd change. That if I was perfect enough, beautiful enough, interesting enough, he'd finally be satisfied." He shook his head. "But Charles doesn't want satisfaction. He wants the chase. The moment you become real to him, flawed and human, he's already looking for the next conquest." We sat in silence for a moment, two Omegas who'd loved the same cruel alpha and learned the same hard lessons. "I'm sorry," River said quietly, "for everything I did to you. I knew you were his husband and I pursued him anyway. Thought I was saving him from a boring marriage. I was wrong about so many things. We were both wrong." I admitted. "I thought the problem was me. That if I could just fix myself, become someone worthy, everything would work out. And now I know the problem was never me." The words felt strange but true. Charles would have treated any Omega the same way eventually. It was never about what I lacked. It was about what he lacks. the ability to value people beyond their utility. River finished his coffee and stood to leave. At the door he turned back. You're braver than I gave you credit for. Walking away when you did. I should have done the same. After he left, I felt oddly lighter. His apology hadn't erased the pain he'd caused. But seeing him caught in the same cycle Charles had trapped me in, proved something I'd needed to understand. It really wasn't about me. That evening, I returned to Blake's apartment to find him waving an envelope excitedly. This came for you. Looks official. My hands trembled as I opened it. Divorce papers, finalized, requiring only my signature. A letter from Charles accompanied them. Robert, I've thought carefully about our situation. This marriage was a mistake from the start, for both of us. I'll ensure you receive appropriate financial support as my former spouse, as that's my legal obligation. Sign these papers and move forward with your life. I intend to do the same. No apology, no acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. Just cold, legal efficiency. I should sign them immediately. I knew. This was what I wanted. Freedom, a clean break, the chance to rebuild. But some part of me needed one final conversation. One last chance to ask the question that had haunted me since the beginning. The next day I went to Charles's office. The receptionist recognized me, though she looked surprised to see me. She probably knew about the divorce, but hadn't been told to turn me away yet. Charles stood when I entered his office, his expression carefully neutral. Robert, I didn't expect to see you. I came to sign the papers, I said, pulling them from my bag. But first I need to know something. Did you ever love me? Even for a moment, he sat back down, and for once he actually seemed to consider his answer carefully. I don't know, he finally admitted. Maybe at first, there was something. You were kind, gentle. But after the wedding, when real life started, he trailed off. You weren't what I needed. You mean I wasn't perfect enough? I mean you were too real, he corrected. Too vulnerable, too emotional. Being with you felt like drowning in your insecurities. I couldn't breathe. Strange how hearing the truth hurt less than I'd expected. Maybe because it confirmed what I'd already suspected. The problem had never been my appearance or personality. It was that Charles couldn't handle authentic human connection. I signed the papers right there, each stroke of the pen feeling like breaking chains I'd worn so long. I'd forgotten they weren't part of me. Goodbye, Charles, I said, standing to leave. I hope you find whatever you're looking for, Robert, he called as I reached the door. For what it's worth, I never meant to hurt you this badly. I looked back at him one last time. Yes, you did. You just didn't think I was important enough for it to matter. Walking out of that office, out of that building, tears came, but not sad ones. These were tears of relief, of release, of finally letting go of the fantasy that had kept me trapped. Blake hugged me when I got home, asking no questions. That night, I slept better than I had in months. I was free, truly completely free. Not from loving Charles. That would take time. But from needing his love to define my worth. And somehow that felt like enough. Like more than enough. It felt like a beginning.